So the topic I'm talking on is Socialist Whodunnits, activism and crime writing in Cork. And I suppose where this links in with me is I have two crime novels written. They're kind of political crime novels, and they are set largely around Cork. The first of them is called To Keep a Bird Singing, and the second one, the follow-up, is A River of Bodies. And there will be a third book in the series to come, probably the year after next, and that will complete what's called the Solidarity Books Trilogy. And people have described them as a socialist whodunit, and also as an arco-noir, which is a fine hashtag for me to use. But so I'm really glad of that, because that's in essence, in a way, what they are. But I didn't really set out to write them like that. But I'm glad that people have identified that that's the angle that they're coming from. And I suppose the bottom line is that they are certainly books that are very infused with my life as a political activist in Cork. And I was involved for a great many years in the work solidarity movement in Cork and nationally, and would have been a good friend of Alan MacSimoin's, who really probably introduced me to organised anarchism in this country. And I know Alan would have been a person who was involved in the Sarah Lundberg summer school. So there is a big connection between my books and my activism. But just to go back a little bit and talk about, first of all, the genre, the strange thing is there aren't that many socialist whodunit books around. And what's always struck me as sort of notable about that is that we all know that a great amount of crime in society is connected to capitalism. You could say they're intimately linked, really, in a way, and yet there isn't really an awful lot of crime books written that really tackle that angle. The dominant genre and subgenre are the psychopathic killers, the misogynist murderers, and so on and so forth. And of course, the dominant strand of investigative work is linked to the police. So you will often find, that there's the police procedural subgenre and others that really involve members of the police force solving crimes, often dealing with personal problems or, problems to do with the police not really that interested in solving crimes. And then there's one or two detectives who really, set out to, break the mold, and they solve the crime and get the murder. But it's an awful lot of it is to do with, violent murders and bloody gore, really. And that's not something I'm that interested in, on the contrary, in fact. So I set out purposely to write something quite different that really tackled sort of some of the other crimes that are out there in society. Crimes that are linked not necessarily to capitalism, but are linked in a way to the society as it's organized under capitalism, and in particular Irish society. And I don't want to say there aren't, of course, any socialist writers out there. I mean, there's notable people like Jean Kerrigan, and of course there's, Stig Larsson in Sweden, the late Stig Larsson, of course. I mean, he was a groundbreaker in terms of the books he wrote. And I mean, I would have found him a very inspiring writer, in the sense that I think he managed to really start to focus in on that link between how society is organized and the deeper levels of corruption, and how that plays out in terms of the crimes that people experience in their day-to-day life. And of course, he created these fabulous characters like Elizabeth Salander, who is a feminist activist and, all-around warrior for the right sort of causes, in a way. And I think he's a really fabulous writer, and his books are great. At least the first three of them. But returning a little bit so to my own background, I think really we used to laugh a little bit about this, at least I think, if memory serves me right, that way back in the old days, there was this kind of thing that, the Holy Trinity, of course, is a very important concept in Catholicism, but we often thought on the left we faced a Holy Trinity of forces in opposition to us. And these were basically the church, which was the Catholic Church, the state, which was the Irish state, and lastly, of course, Irish capitalism or the business community. So they were the Holy Trinity, really, that were standing in the way of the revolution and creating a much better society in this world. And of course, in a sense, my books, in a way, kind of probably are a little bit organized a little bit around that, or that's certainly a theme in them, because all three aspects tie into what my few investigators attempt to deal with. So firstly, I think talking about, that very important angle, the state, what I was really thinking about first of all was the Gardaí. And at a very young age, I, was aware of a different side to the Gardaí. And really this was because I took a close interest in politics and in the news. And I grew up really at the time when the heavy gang were in operation. And I read and was aware of what they were up to, that they were engaged in torture, and that there was that they were a fairly brutal organization who beat confessions from prisoners. And it was, appalling. When I got involved politically in Cork, kind of really when I started going to college, we got involved in setting up a social society. I mean, we became quite aware straight away that the special branch were around, and we knew to avoid them because there was a couple of nasty individuals among them who would take personal pleasure in making life difficult for you. And they were there and around, and we were careful to avoid crossing paths with them. But of course, the people they were really interested in, the people who they reserved their real viciousness for was the Republicans, and largely it was rank and file Republicans, but also it was anyone else linked to them. And there was a very famous case in Cork where that I became aware of when I was, a young activist, and this was where they had simulated the execution of a young Republican. And I really found that absolutely abhorrent. I thought, if I'm living in a city where something like that can go on, what sort of a place is it? Of course, most people paid no attention to what the Gardaí were up to, but those who wanted to know could find out. And it was definitely the case that there were some serious headbangers among them, and that a lot of this activity and repression and bad behavior was tolerated, even encouraged from above. So that was kind of one side to the Gardaí and Special Branch that I was aware of from a young age. And I think as an anarchist, because anarchists are traditionally opposed to authoritarianism and to the idea of people being forced to live in any particular way. And the state really is benign at one level, but its iron fist is the Gardaí and the police, and most particularly the Special Branch. So I never really had a great deal of love for the Gardaí, but once I found out a little bit about what they were capable of getting involved in, I had even less. So I think that's probably where my early feelings about the police and the authoritarian state kind of met with a sort of an activism where we were very much aware that they were watching what we were doing. And in fact, in the early days of the anarchist movement in Cork, it was clear they were spying on us. And they approached a number of us at one stage, and they knew an awful lot about what we were doing. And I think we were a little bit of a rare species, really. Anarchists were like, there was no other anarchists around in Cork at all. It hadn't been. I don't know if you have to go right back before there were any anarchists. And so we were something of an oddity, and I don't know whether they really believed we were any danger. We actually weren't, but they certainly, you know, went out of their way to keep an eye on us. And so, you know, that's the reality that is there. But there's probably a different side to it too, in that one of the things that I came to much later on was the awareness of the Gardaí's other role. And for instance, there was one particular case that has popped up in my books, and this was how they turned a blind eye to abuse and to the activities of pedophiles within the Catholic Church. And there was a particularly interesting case, a guy called Father Gallagher, who was actually, has been, he's passed away now, but Gallagher was involved in abuse in Cabra, in the school for the deaf there for girls. But he also was Cork based at one stage, and he was also engaged in abusing children in Cork. But Gallagher is a very interesting case in that he didn't ever seem to fall foul of the Gardaí. You know, they were alerted to his activities many times, but he appears to have, well, there's nothing to see here, was a bit of the attitude with Father Gallagher. And he was able to get away with his crimes for a long period of time. And I've been interested in that other angle to the Gardaí, which I've come to a bit later on in life, which is how they often either totally missed what was going on regarding the abuse of children by Catholic clerics, or they just didn't really want to pursue it. Or is there another angle again, and this is something that comes up in my books and that I kind of was interested to find out, were a number of them, you know, also engaged in abuse, and was there more to it going on? Of course, it's a bit of an area where, you know, certainly here, if you talk about that, I found anyway, if one talks about this issue openly, just like, oh no, the Irish Gardaí would never be going on. No, it was only all just, you know, people just, you know, a little bit afraid of annoying the wrong people. You know, if you investigate a Father Gallagher, like, you might, you know, be stepping on people's toes there. So it was all it's all a little bit configured in that sort of a way, that's the extent of the Gardaí's issue with the fact that they appear to have missed a tidal wave of abuse in this country over many generations. You know, they were just, you know, not that interested in it, and they didn't want to be annoying the clergy. So, you know, is that the case? Maybe that is true. But I think one of the things I wanted to explore a little bit more is that maybe there was a lot more to it. Maybe there's a much deeper, more criminal connection between the Gardaí and the Catholic Church in terms of its more abusive sides, and that, you know, this was there in the 40s, 50s and 60s. So who's to say? Anyway, that's sort of one of the angles. But returning again then to a sort of a separate side of Catholic Church, I'm aware that I may not have enough time, so I'll move quickly on and say that I was also then aware that my own experience with the Catholic Church was, relatively speaking, benign. But I recently met a person I was in national school with, and quite by accident, we were reminiscing about our time in national school, which is a long time ago now. And we both commented on the violence that was meted out to us by Christian brothers. And I was struck once again about how it has stayed with people of my generation for really down through a long time, you know, and I've kind of put it behind me a bit, but, you know, he reminded me again of how it affected people, and he was quite affected by it. He told me, you know, and it's sad to hear. It makes you angry as well. And I mean, I had a number of people teaching me at school, Catholic brothers, who were absolutely, they were really violent people, and they scared the life out of me, scared the living daylights out of me, really. I was terrorized at school, and I was so delighted when I got out of school, finished with it, You know, and I think it must have affected my attitude to an authoritarian climate and to becoming an anarchist. So I certainly, you know, I was really wary of them afterwards, and there was a little bit of abuse, sexual abuse went on also, and you know, I was lucky I escaped that, and I'm glad now I escaped it, because I think, you know, it's so damaging. And so my experience, again, of the Catholic Church is one of this total disconnect between what they profess, Christianity, in which I have a bit of time for. I think there's a lot of nice ideas in Christianity, but largely speaking, you know, my experience of them is that they were a very violent group of people, and of course, from another dimension entirely, in terms of the religious systems and beliefs. You know, I think they're a very malign force in society, and I think religious beliefs are very dangerous, and I'm completely opposed to them. So when I came across writings like Michael Bakunin, who I think famously proclaimed, if God existed, it would be necessary to destroy him, then I really felt, this man is making sense to me. And I do think there's a more dangerous side to religious thinking than we really ever delve into. And it's why I'm an atheist. I think religious ideas are actually bad for people. I think they set up a mentality, or perhaps they encourage a mentality which is actually bad for people, makes them subservient, compliant in society. And I think when you're subservient and compliant, all sorts of other social, health, and economic problems follow on from that condition. And religion, as we well know, on the left, is a serious force in society, but a very dangerous one. So I have my own sort of, you know, how I intersected with it was in different ways at different times. But, you know, in terms of my activism, then it's very interesting that some of the big things we became involved in as a young activist were really around things like contraception, which was really a campaign led largely by women, in my experience, back in those days. But I was also involved in the early days of the divorce referendum, although I was at that time completely opposed to marriage and so on, as an institution, and still am. But, you know, then we got involved in the repeal, you know, the Eighth Amendment came along, and that was the Catholic Church we were dealing with in terms of political activism. And of course, I remember one time, one of the early editions of Workers' Solidarity had the case of Joanna Hayes on, you know, who was the woman who was severely, wrongly accused of murder by a Garda Courtney in Kerry, who was actually incidentally a member of the murder squad who were linked in with the heavy gang, to go back to that sort of thing. So, you know, Joanna Hayes's case was something that we got involved in, just to highlight it and to talk about it and to say, look what happens in this Catholic Ireland that we're living in, that a young defenseless woman, you know, who's pregnant, you know, gets accused of these crimes and has more or less, I think, I don't recall exactly, I think she actually confessed to one such, and it was only afterwards that her case, she was proven to be innocent when medical data came forward that basically contradicted what the confession was that the police had extracted from her. I think that's the case. My memory isn't as good as it was, but in any case, they're the types of things we got involved in. So I suppose just to kind of round off a little bit then, the other side of it then, I think political activism for me, I think over the years, one of the things I wanted to get into in my books was all the great people I've met as on the left who are activists. So in all sorts, and I'm not just talking about, obviously I met many great anarchists over the years, but I've met loads of people on the left, from the Workers' Party to Sinn Féin to the Labour Party, the left of the Labour Party. I met many over the years in political parties and not in any political parties. And some of them are really great people who've worked tirelessly and selfishly, selflessly over the years to, you know, for good causes and to do the right thing. And so I made my main character, the guy who begins the investigation in my books, To Keep a Bird Singing, Noel Sullivan. He's not a politico, but he's interested in politics. He's had his own run-ins with the Gardaí, and he left many years ago Ireland, and now he's back, and he got involved in fighting the privatisation of the bin charges in Cork. Campaign he didn't win, and it's totally by accident that he gets involved in a case that he really doesn't know anything about, and it's a kind of a rabbit hole. It's about a man who went missing in Cork in 1990, about which there's a lot of rumours. And as he investigates more and more, he starts to realise that there's more to this man's disappearance, and that there's a possible link to Special Branch. And then he makes this kind of discovery that this guy had also been, this missing man, Jim Dalton, had also been in an industrial school. And it's at that point that the story really starts to move in a different direction. And we see that different forces are interested in stopping Noel Sullivan from finding out what really happened to Jim Dalton. And it's around that story then that I've tried to weave in my sense of the connection between the Catholic Church, the Irish state, the repressive arm of the Irish state, the Gardaí, and in particular Special Branch, and the secretive deals that are done by the police in order to get their way. And I think I've enjoyed a couple of things in particular about how the book's been received. And this, that people have said it's great to read some socialist sort of fiction, and you know, where the characters are strongly, you know, they're not, I don't think they're in your face left wing, but their colors are nailed to the mast, and you get to see that in time. And of course they're up against quite powerful forces, so you know, there's we always like being underdogs in a way on the left, and maybe I'm playing to that tune as well. And then the other thing is that because the books are set in Cork, there's been actually quite a very positive reception to it here, and people have said, God, I never thought such things could go on in Cork. And you know, I mean, obviously I don't know what's gone on in Cork, but certainly I wanted to base the story in Cork, and I've used a lot of Cork locations. And you know, that's kind of it roots the book in a world that's very ordinary, and I think that makes it even more, it makes it kind of better fiction as well, I think, when that happens. So that's essentially it here. I'd really like to thank Mary Muldowney for inviting me to talk here today, and I hope you have enjoyed what I have had to say. It's a bit impromptu, and also, you know, if you get to look at the books in time and you like them, please let other people know, and that's my plug. So I'd like to thank Mary, in particular, then thank the Sarah Lundberg Summer School for asking me to participate. And I know only a little about Sarah, and I think this is a really fine idea that a person's life is celebrated in this way, and I'm delighted to be a part of it, and thank you very much. And I'll just click off there now, which will probably end up with me doing a couple of things incorrectly.